Deaths due to COVID-19 shots. Yes, it is a thing. And that's the topic of today's discussion on Bold and Blunt. And I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. And the latest news on the COVID-19 shots. Senator Ron Johnson says don't take them. There are a lot of facts and data and science and research about the negative impacts of these COVID-19 shots to prove that viewpoint. But guess what? Surprise, surprise, the government doesn't want you to know that. The government doesn't even want you to discuss it on social media. Before I get into more of that, I want to quickly mention if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, where guess what? You may also subscribe to Bold and Blunt. Yes, right at washingtontimes.com. Scroll to the bottom of the page. Click on the newsletter section. I'm giving you the fastest way to find it here because I know your time is precious, because I know my listeners aren't paid activists, right, out in the streets throwing bricks through storefront windows. No, you guys have jobs, so you need to know the quick way to subscribe. Scroll to the bottom of the page, click on the newsletter section, find Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. That's me. Click on that and enter your email address. And guess what? You'll get Monday, Wednesday, Friday delivered right to your email box. My newsletter containing my commentaries that I write at the Washington Times, like on the dangers of the COVID shots and the lies of the Anthony Fauci and Bill Gateses of the world, which I've been covering since day one of the coronavirus. And you'll also get my twice a week Bold and Blunt podcast. But guess what? You can also get Bold and Blunt at Real Life Network and wherever podcasts are offered. And yes, I say and because there is a listener out there who takes offense at the way I say the word and. It's A-N-D, I know this, and it's pronounced and. But when you drag it out, and, hey, that's how it's pronounced. So deal with it. I want to read you this Rasmussen's reports because it's fascinating, and it came out January 12th, 2024. So this month, the headline is this: more than half suspect COVID-19 vaccines have caused deaths. And guess what? Vaccines should be in quotation marks because I haven't been calling them vaccines for a very long time because A, they're not vaccines, not in the traditional, normally accepted definition of the world, which means you take a shot, right? You take a vaccine and it protects you against getting a certain disease or virus, and it protects others from getting a certain disease or virus. Well, the government changed the definition of vaccines because they saw early on that these so-called COVID-19 vaccines, air quotes around the word vaccines, weren't actually working like every other vaccine in history. So they had to change the definition. They had to make it seem a lot less vaccine-like, right? They had to put words on it that sort of couched the ability of these shots to stop the spread of COVID-19 by saying they may protect against. They might protect. They do a little bit of protecting, but don't expect them to protect. So they're shots, right? More than half suspect COVID-19, air quotes, vaccines, and air quotes, have caused deaths. Let me read from this because this is it's a really interesting and important finding because it shows that Americans are waking up to the fact that, hey, this whole COVID madness was ridiculous. A majority of Americans believe COVID-19 vaccines, shots, may be to blame for many unexplained deaths, and nearly 1 in 4 say someone they know could be among the victims. Holy cow, a quarter of Americans think they know somebody who have died from the COVID-19 shots. The latest Rasmussen reports, National Telephone and Online Survey, finds that 53% of American adults believe it is likely that side effects of COVID-19 vaccines, make that shots, have caused a significant number of unexplained deaths, up from 49% a year ago, including 30% who think it's very likely. 36% now don't say a significant number of deaths have been caused by vaccine, make that shots, side effects, including 16% who believe it's not at all likely. Another 11% are not sure. The 16% who believe it's not at all likely are your Democrat voters, right? The 36% say a significant number of deaths have not been caused by the COVID shots are your Democrat voters, right? The non-thinking types, the types that think government can do no wrong. Government wouldn't lie to what? Government lie? Government wouldn't lie to us. Agent Orange. Government wouldn't lie to us. Military forced anthrax vaccines. Government would not lie to us. Tuskegee Airmen? Oh my gosh, government does not lie. So anyhow, 24%, back to this Rasmussen survey, 24% of adults say they personally know someone whose death they think may have been caused by side effects of COVID-19 vaccines, make that shots, while 61% don't and another 10% are not sure. A year ago, 28% believe someone they know may have died from the vaccine, make that shots. Look, whatever the number is, anything over 1%, right, to account for maybe crazy lunatic conspiracy theorists, anything over 1% is a concern for American citizens because A, these shots were forced on us, and B, not simply because they were forced, but simply because in this country we have a form of government where government officials are supposed to be the humble servants of those who pay their salaries, meaning the hardworking American taxpayers. So not simply because of the fact the shots were forced, but because of the system that we have in place in this country, Americans have the right to know what their government bureaucrats are up to. So if they're creating medical treatments for American citizens have the right to know the information that was used during the creation of these medical treatments, whether they're mandated or not, but especially if they're mandated, right? It doesn't matter whether government tells us nothing to see here, folks, go home, all's right with the world, everything's safe. It's for the individual to decide whether that is true or not. And so we saw Pfizer trying to hide the data that they used to develop the vaccines for 75 years, saying that it would be impossible to go through all that information and darken out the stuff that was exempt from Freedom of Information Acts, right? Requests. It would be impossible, they said. It would take 75 years to do all that. Well, that's a bit alarming because it seems to me that the information that Pfizer used to develop these shots, the very information after they developed these shots that they used to assure us all that these are safe, 100% safe, nothing to worry about, totally safe, should be maybe on the top of the pile, right? So they've got 75 years worth of documents printed out in their emails, in their databases, and it seems to me the stuff proving that these shots are safe ought to be like right there, easy to grab hold of, easy to show. So Pfizer got slapped down by a court, right? But that doesn't mean the information is out there. We're having trouble as American citizens determining the actual truthful safety of these shots. And because Anthony Fauci and his band of merry liars in bureaucracies and in government, and Bill Gates and his band of merry liars in the global governments, and his friends in China, communist China, and all these politicians that are supposed to represent us and take our dime to live off of, and are profiting from big pharma at the same time, are all telling us, hey, take these boosters. The boosters are great. You know, the boosters are so great, stick them in the arms of your 6-month-old babies because your babies will love you for it. Your babies will grow up and they will thank you from saving them from the coronavirus, which I don't even know how dangerous the coronavirus is anymore, because you can't get accurate numbers on that either. But this show is about the dangers of the coronavirus vaccines, make that shots, and the boosters, and all the boosters that are being busily pushed on American citizens as we speak. So, where do you go if you want the truth? Well, don't ask Anthony Fauci, okay? Because his answer is take the shot, take the shot. Don't ask, mainstream media. Don't ask MSNBC. Don't even ask Fox News. Because Fox News, right, the place that conservatives for years have gone to when they want the truth about the matter, or at least some of the truth that the other media won't tell, Fox News profited big off these shots. They ran in their bottom right-hand corner for weeks there. The ever-changing, ever-rising case test positive count, drumming up hysteria and alarm. So you would watch Fox News, you would have Anthony Fauci on spinning his alarmism and so forth about the need to stay home and stop singing in church. And then simultaneously you would see in the bottom right hand screen, oh my gosh, there's another positive of the corona. Oh my gosh, there's another positive. There's another. And really there was no context, because just because you test positive for something does not mean anything, right? Me sitting here right now speaking into this microphone, if some medical doctor tested me for the flu or some other virus, I could test positive for it, but it doesn't mean I'm sick, right? That's how viruses spread. They go from person to person until they find a vulnerable one, right? And then the vulnerable one has to stay home in bed and drink tea and eat chicken soup and so forth, or go to the doctor. And it's your young and your elderly, right? And the ones that have other health issues like diabetes or obesity, which same thing we found to be true with the coronavirus, but that got pushed to the side, right? We didn't dare talk about overweight people, obese people, and their chances for landing in the hospital when they tested positive for the coronavirus versus the perfectly healthy 25-year-old male who was a superstar college athlete who doesn't feel a thing. We treated them all the same. Stay home, stay out of school, stay out of work. Wait for the stimulus check. And for God's sake, do not go to church. Yeah, you can go and get your daily marijuana bag at the local dealer. That's fine. That's necessary. And you can run to Walmart and try and find some toilet paper and pick up your bottled water. That's fine. But don't go to church, and don't go to school, and don't go out and get fresh air, because that's very dangerous. So we were all told, take the shot, take the shot, take the shot. And now we're trying to find out about the safety of the shot. And geez, how come people keep dying? There's strange deaths taking place. It's not really talked about. You got to search for the information, and then if you do find the information and it's truthful, you're called a conspiracy theorist, and in some cases booted off social media. But this is why it's so great to have somebody like Senator Ron Johnson on Capitol Hill, because his research into the coronavirus shots, which have spanned years now, his research and his staff research into it is not only excellent, right? You can go to the website and you can read the releases and the studies and so forth that they've put out, but it adds a voice of cooler head, calm reason, right, to some of the hysterical accusations and some of the wild claims that are out there. It's hard enough sifting through myths versus truths on the coronavirus. We don't need mass hysteria over some of the things that are actually turning out to be true, such as deaths due to the shots. And this is what Senator Ron Johnson is on Bold and Blunt today to discuss, because I know that is an issue that is being whispered louder and louder if you look at this Rasmussen report, and we still don't have answers. We're about as in the dark on the truths and the data, the accurate data on deaths due to the COVID shots now in 2024 as we were years ago when the shots were first being mandated, pushed, and forced. Senator Ron Johnson, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
Well, thanks for having me on, and this is a topic that I appreciate being given the opportunity to talk about.
This is a topic the American people desperately need to discuss and learn the truths of. I'm having trouble getting the facts on whether these COVID shots, these COVID vaccines, are safe for American people, and especially those as young as 6 months. You are too.
Absolutely. And, it is true that just about any drug, any injection, there can be side effects, and that's, of course, what the COVID cartel is saying about the COVID injections. The problem we have here is their own vaccine adverse event reporting systems that they touted in October of 2020 before they got the emergency use authorization on these shots. They were touting that, and within a few months after the shots started, they didn't like the results, so they started denigrating them. But the fact of the matter is right now, the most recent figures off of the VAERS system worldwide, there are about 37,000 deaths reported associated with the COVID-19 shot. I'm calling it a shot because it's not a traditional vaccine. 24.4% of those deaths are occurring either the day of vaccination or within 2 days. That ought to concern our federal health officials, but it's not. It may be privately, but they're not going to say anything because they push these things. They will never admit they were wrong. I have written over 60 oversight letters in some way, shape, form about COVID vaccines. I don't get any information back, basically. And in particular, I've been asking for their own analyses of the VAERS system. They were going to do what they call proportional reporting ratios and empirical Bayesian analysis. That was part of their standard operating procedure they talked about and that they touted. They apparently have done them, but they won't release them to me or the public. That tells you something. We pay their salaries. We pay for the development of the VAERS system, for the development of these analyses, and the fact that the federal health officials won't show us their own analysis, I think, speaks volumes.
It's a huge red flag. And I want to go back first to something you said a minute ago. The deaths from the shots, can you put sort of any context on that in comparison to other vaccines/shots? How does the COVID shots compare in terms of deaths?
So if you take a look at deaths per million doses for the COVID shots, just U.S. deaths, it's 25.1 deaths per million doses. You compare that to the flu vaccine, which is hard to get exactly the number of doses administered. So what we did is we assumed that 70% of the distributed flu vaccines actually got injected, okay? If you assume that, deaths from flu vaccine is 0.46 per million. So wow. Flu is 0.46 deaths per million. The COVID shot is 25.1. It's a 55-fold increase over the flu vaccine, and because you've got a group called ICANN suing the federal government to release some of this information, we got some more dose information that we could apply to the Moderna and Pfizer shots. There was one lot of Moderna that had about 440 deaths per million doses. There were two lots of Pfizer that had 160 deaths per million doses. One of my oversight letters, very early on, it appeared that there were hot lots. Probably about 4 or 5% of the lots accounted for about 80% of the serious adverse events. It took the FDA, I think, over a year to respond to me, and even though I gave them all the evidence, gave them the lots, gave them the number of adverse events, compared that to flu vaccine, they just came back and said, "Oh, we don't see any evidence of disparity." They just deny it. This is a scandal, and unfortunately, it's not just federal health agencies. The Biden administration, it's Big Pharma, it's the media that is controlled by Big Pharma, by the billions of dollars they spend on ads, the social media companies. That is the COVID cartel. They all push the vaccines. They all sabotage early treatment. The body count is way too high. They will never admit they're wrong. And the problem is they have the power to make it very difficult to prove them wrong.
Okay, so let's just cut to the big question that everybody wants to know, right? Should people be taking these shots? Should they be giving them to their kids?
No, I've called for, because people like Peter McCulloch have called for withdrawing this. Now the Florida Surgeon General has called for the withdrawal of the mRNA shots across the board in terms of human consumption. This is not new technology. They were trying this. It looks like it could be really fabulous technology for maybe cancers or something like that. But to roll this out, inadequately tested. By the way, lying to us, for example, that this would stay in the arm when they knew it's encapsulated in the lipid nanoparticle that was going to biodistribute all over the body, caused the cell to produce the spike protein, which is toxic to the body. The body's reaction then is to attack it to destroy that spike protein. That causes inflammation. Inflammation of the heart is what is myocarditis. Okay, so in layman's terms, it's easy to understand how this harm could be done. We just had a great event with Marjorie Taylor Greene, with Peter McCulloch and Ryan Cole and Dr. Milhone from Hawaii. They just laid out all the facts. It's just obvious. It's indisputable. And yet, the COVID cartel is keeping this hidden from the American public.
Is there ever going to be any accountability for the victims of these shots or the families of the victims, do you think? Is there anything that you can do on Capitol Hill to maybe put some financial punishments on those who have forced Americans to take these shots?
Well, once we get people to admit the dangers, to admit that they were wrong, yes, we would have the capability, but right now we are so far from a general understanding of the public about this. I suppose the good news is Rasmussen just took a poll, and more than half of Americans believe they know somebody that the COVID shot killed, okay, or they believe that these COVID shots can kill people. I don't know the exact question. So there's a reason that the uptake of all the boosters, I think we should be on our 8th booster by now. Obviously these things aren't working that well if you need 8 shots to prevent the new variant of COVID, right? So no, it is insane what is happening. To me, it's so obvious that these things should be off the market. They need to go back to the drawing board. We need far more tests. And there were so many safety tests that were not performed. Pfizer itself, the FDA actually fought to keep the Pfizer trial data private or out of the public domain for 75 years.
Yes.
So Pfizer didn't have to fight for that. The FDA fought on their behalf. That just shows the corruption of this process.
So what do you think is going on here? Is this simply financial considerations that Big Pharma and their partners in government and so forth and the bureaucratic class want to make as much money as possible? Or is it an accountability thing that they're in too deep now and they have to keep the narrative that these shots are safe?
Well, it's both. I mean, one follows the other, but there's no doubt about it. They look at this mRNA platform as a highly profitable platform. First of all, we've given vaccine manufacturers complete liability protection, right? And so we've gone from 3 vaccines on the childhood schedule to something like 60 or 70-some doses, okay? And we've never tested any of these childhood vaccines on a true placebo. We're not keeping track of the accumulation of the body of certain ingredients in these vaccines. But that's just spawned an industry where drug companies could just produce vaccines and never worry about liability. I mean, that's unheard of in our society, where you can produce a product and not worry about liability whatsoever. Combined with the mRNA platform, normal vaccines, it's an attenuated or a killed virus. It takes time to culture that. It takes 6 months to maybe 9 months before you have a flu vaccine toward a particular flu virus. It's just not profitable enough. mRNA, you can basically dial in, email the genome, and you can be producing this mRNA vaccine basically the next day. And so it can be highly profitable. They want a universal vaccine program to force on people because it is so highly profitable. But then once they use the pandemic to force this new technology, this new platform, and I would say it blew up in their faces, all of our faces, caused so much harm, now they can't admit what they've done. They just can't admit it. So that's what we're up against.
So I've seen and heard people talk about how these shots, these COVID shots, alter an individual's DNA. Do you have any truth? Is there any truth to that?
So the way they manufacture these things, there is DNA contamination in this as well. And the there's always DNA contamination in other shots, and that's what the FDA will say. Well, we allow that; it's proven to be safe. That's what they'll say. The difference is this DNA, these smaller segments, are encapsulated in lipid nanoparticle, so the body can't attack it. That's why they encapsulate the mRNA in a lipid nanoparticle. So otherwise, the body would attack it and do nothing. Okay, so they enclose that. So now the DNA could be transfected into a cell, and it is possible to potentially impact the cell that way with real DNA, not just. And by the way, this isn't true messenger RNA. This is modified. This RNA is staying in the body way longer than they ever anticipated. This was supposed to be stay in the arm, produce the antibodies, and be destroyed within a day or two, right? Now there's studies showing this is staying in the body for months because they modified it to make sure the body couldn't destroy it right away. Again, there's so much that they did know. This is why a guy like Dr. Michael Yeadon, who was the 30-year vice president of research for Pfizer, was beside himself when he heard what his colleagues were doing. He understood the danger. Back in 2020, before they ever rolled these things out, he understood it, and he's just beside himself of what his colleagues have done because he knows what they know. He knows they knew of the danger of the potential harm here, and yet they rolled it out anyway.
Has there been any reform or enough reform at the FDA and the CDC so Americans going forward can have trust in these agencies again?
No, there's absolutely no reform being done. In fact, the Biden administration is just putting more members of the COVID cartel in here. I mean, the fact that they're recommending an 8th booster when they see the harm, where there's studies showing there's negative efficacy for these. I mean, there's studies showing that the 3rd booster boosts your level of IgG4 antibody. That's the antibody that allergists try and boost to prevent the body from reacting to a certain allergen. It's an immunosuppressant, and so one of the adverse effects here is an autoimmune reaction where your body's not reacting. That's why there are some studies that show these things actually have negative efficacy. Plus, they're unsafe. Again, there is so much science being written about this, but there's so much science being completely ignored by our federal health agencies and the COVID cartel. So, no, there's been no reform. I think that, if anything, the agencies are getting worse and worse and worse. For example, just not responding to congressional oversight. I mean, they just give me the middle finger, and they're getting away with it.
Yeah, I don't quite understand how they can continue to get away with that, because I know that you've been seeking information for years now. What are the next steps? Do you have any way to compel the information?
Well, we need more doctors that have the knowledge, medical researchers that understand this stuff to step up to the plate. Right now, they're in fear because the doctors that have been destroyed. Their licenses have been restricted or threatened. Their certifications have been threatened. They've been fired. They've been sued. So, again, it's very effective. When you attack the dissidents, the ones that are telling the truth, other people aren't willing to speak up. And it's part of the problem. So you've got the medical establishment in general. If they suspect this, they're staying mum. So many doctors obviously recommend this to their patient. They don't want to admit that something they recommended to the patient might have killed them or produced a long-term harm. And so collectively, the medical establishment also is just not willing to look at this. So they don't even consider when somebody drops dead right after an inoculation. They don't even consider it might have been the vaccine. They don't want to consider it. So that has happened time and time again. So no, we've got a enormous challenge ahead of us. There's such a resistance to reveal the truth, expose the truth, and own up to the real harm that has been caused by these vaccines or this gene therapy.
One last question, Senator Johnson. When you look ahead down the road at this pandemic treaty that the World Health Organization and the Davos UN crowd is trying to push, what is your response? How should American citizens regard this?
Reject it. I had an amendment that would have deemed any agreement with the WHO a treaty to come before the Senate for debate and ratification. Unfortunately, every Democrat voted against that. Every Republican except one voted for it. And so this is a real danger. I participated in Marjorie Taylor Greene's hearing last week, and this is what my plea to the House, where they have the majority, is take this seriously. But no, this is incredibly dangerous. We will give up our national sovereignty, our health freedom. These are some bad people who are controlling this. These are the people that had the miserably failed response to COVID, and they're the ones in charge, and they want to be able to be in charge of the next pandemic, and that's why they're talking about disease X. I mean, they're laying the groundwork for how they're going to create a state of fear again with the next bug, the next virus, the next bacteria, so they can take total control.
There you go. There you go. Senator Ron Johnson, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk about this very important issue on Bold and Blunt.
Well, thank you for giving me the opportunity.
I just want to give those stats one more time, just in case you didn't catch it and aren't in a position where you can rewind. So according to Senator Ron Johnson, his data, his research, which has spanned years now, right? In America only, this is not worldwide, this is just America only, there has been a 55-fold increase in deaths after taking the COVID shot compared to the best available information of deaths after the flu shot. So deaths per million after taking the COVID shots is 25.1. 25.1 deaths per million doses of the COVID shot. Compare that to the flu, Senator Johnson said, and the information, the data isn't as accurate as he would like, but still there's a sizable enough difference to have a certain level of alarm here. So compare that to the flu, 0.46 deaths per million doses of the flu shot. Look, the numbers may skew a bit, right? People may play with numbers, but in the end, numbers don't lie. And more than that, common sense. Common sense won't steer you wrong. And remember this. If vaccines normally take years and years and years, a decade or so, to go from development to market into the arms of those who want to take them, and under the coronavirus, we had Operation Warp Speed moving these shots to market in less than a year. Ding, 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 red flag. And when the government tells you these shots are safe, oh yes, completely safe, wildly safe, unbelievably safe, when they haven't even been tested long enough to make that claim, again, common sense kicks in. I want to thank you for listening. Remind you, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at washingtontimes.com, at Real Life Network, and of course, wherever podcasts are offered. Tune in next time. And in the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.